It's one of those simple questions that sounds like it should have a straightforward answer, but the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. The United States owes over $36 trillion. China? Around $18 trillion. Europe, Japan, India, all owe trillions more. And yet, the entire world's debt combined is now over $300 trillion, almost 3 times the value of everything humans produce in a single year. So, who's holding the other side of that debt? Who's the ultimate lender in a world where everyone owes everyone? The answer reveals how the modern economy doesn't actually rest on stability. It rests on motion. To understand this global tangle, we first have to remember what debt really is. It's not just a scary number on a government website. Debt started as something deeply human, a promise. Thousands of years ago, if you lent your neighbor a bag of grain, they'd pay you back after harvest, maybe with a little extra as thanks. That was debt. As society grew, so did the scale of those promises. Kings wanted castles, empires wanted navies, but no single lender could cover the cost. So in the 1600s, governments started selling pieces of their debt to ordinary citizens. Bonds. Buy a bond, and you're lending money to your country in exchange for interest later. It was a revolutionary idea. For the first time, nations could raise massive funds without raising taxes. By the 20th century, debt wasn't just a tool for war. It was a tool for progress. World War II left the world rebuilding, and in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement tied most global currencies to the US dollar, which back then was tied to gold. But when America began printing more dollars than gold reserves could support, President Nixon ended the gold standard in 1971. From that moment on, money became fiat currency, backed by trust, not by metal. That trust made one thing possible: infinite borrowing. Once governments realized they could borrow without limits, debt exploded. They used it not just to fight wars, but to fund schools, repair roads, and stimulate growth. Debt became the invisible engine that powered everything. Not a last resort, but the default setting of the global economy. But here's the part most people don't realize. When you hear that the United States owes $36 trillion, about 70% of that is owed to Americans themselves. That's right. The U.S. borrows from its own citizens, banks, pension funds, and insurance companies. Here's how it works. When you deposit money in your bank, it doesn't just sit there. Banks use that money to buy government bonds, safe, low-risk investments that pay steady interest. Pension funds do the same thing to grow retirement savings. Insurance companies invest in them to keep premiums stable. So in reality, when the U.S. borrows, it's not borrowing from strangers, it's recycling its own money. When the government pays interest on its debt, that money flows back to citizens and institutions, who then buy more bonds, restarting the cycle. It's a self-sustaining loop. Borrow, spend, earn, lend, repeat. And it's not just happening inside one country. The entire planet is doing it. Japan's citizens buy American bonds. American funds buy Chinese and European debt. China lends to Africa. Europe lends to South America. Money doesn't travel in straight lines anymore. It moves in circles. That's why when we say the world owes $300 trillion, it's not that the world owes some mysterious figure hiding in the shadows. The world, quite literally, owes itself. If that sounds unsustainable, you're right. So why doesn't it all collapse? Because debt keeps the world spinning. When governments borrow, they spend. That spending becomes someone's income. Businesses grow. People get paid. They buy more. It's a feedback loop that drives economic growth. Take away the borrowing, and the loop breaks. If the US or China suddenly stopped borrowing tomorrow, they'd have to cut spending overnight, triggering layoffs, lower incomes, and falling demand. That's exactly what happened in Greece after the 2008 financial crisis. Investors lost confidence and stopped lending. Overnight, Greece couldn't pay its bills. Public workers were fired, wages dropped by 30%, and the economy shrank by a quarter. Politicians around the world learned one painful lesson. Stopping borrowing doesn't just slow an economy, it crashes it. And that's why, even when governments promise to reduce debt, they almost never do. Borrowing isn't just convenient, it's required to keep everything else alive. When crises hit, from recessions to pandemics, borrowing becomes the emergency oxygen tank that keeps the system breathing. In 2020, during COVID, the U.S. borrowed $3.8 trillion in a single year, nearly 20% of its economy, just to keep things running. But here's the catch. The more we borrow, the more fragile the system becomes. As debt piles up, so do the interest payments. A larger and larger share of government budgets now goes toward paying off old loans, not building new infrastructure or funding healthcare. And when investors lose confidence or inflation rises, borrowing gets more expensive. Governments then face three bad choices: raise taxes, cut spending, or print more money. Printing more sounds like the easy way out, but it isn't. When too much money chases too few goods, inflation rises, eroding savings and wages. In extreme cases like Venezuela, hyperinflation turned a loaf of bread into a luxury item worth millions of bolivars. Even in stable economies, inflation quietly eats away at purchasing power, making debt repayment harder and trust weaker. That's why, in uncertain times, investors rush toward things that feel real, like gold or land, anything that can't be printed at will. And as that happens, it exposes a deeper truth. The modern economy isn't built on wealth. It's built on confidence. Confidence that tomorrow's money will still be worth something. Confidence that governments will honor their promises. Confidence that the wheel will keep turning. Because the moment people stop believing, stop lending, the system that holds everything together begins to unravel. So, who does the world owe all this money to? To ourselves. To savers, investors, pensioners, banks. To the very same people who depend on that system to survive. Global debt isn't a villain hiding in the dark. It's the lifeblood of the world we've built. Both our greatest strength and our biggest weakness. Because in the end, debt isn't really about money. It's about trust. And as long as that trust holds, the wheel keeps turning. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share.